They're often engaged in sex rituals and torture and human sacrifice from a very early age. I'm quite convinced that that's going on. There's tremendous evidence. And contrary to the fact that there's a lot of people that don't want you to know that and don't want you to believe that, but there is. And there's people in high places. When people wonder how could they get away with it, they can get away with it because a large percentage of our congressmen, many of our presidents, most of our community leaders, top-ranking police chiefs, mayors, lawyers, judges are involved with this. That's why they can get away with it. The Masonic order feeds into this, although most lower-level Masons aren't aware that there's any kind of satanic thing. They think they're involved in some benevolent thing. And Masonry isn't the highest level. That's just one that Masonry can split off, and you can go into a lot of different things from that. I attended a Southern Baptist meeting many years ago. This guy by the name of Billy Mayo, he was he was an evangelist kind of guy, but he was an ex-DJ. He was involved with rock music. And he did a thing talking about the evil within the rock music industry. And there is. There's a lot of good guys that are good people that are in the rock and music industry, and they don't think there's anything wrong with it. But even though they're not aware of it, they're being influenced by a dark force. And one of the things that Billy Mayo talked about was backmasking.
Meanwhile.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Now, this character that possesses this evil guy goes around murdering everybody. Apparently his name is Bob, and I don't know why they call him Bob. It's probably an acronym. I imagine it may stand for Baal something. Now, this is Satanism. Satanism, their symbol is the cross upside down. Satanism represents the opposite. Okay, they turn things around. That's why there's a lot of backmasking in rock music in particular. And I was listening to this thing in Twin Peaks, and I could tell that this was reverse speech these guys were doing. There are certain words that say one thing forward, another thing backward. Now, these guys know this, okay? There's people that study this. And there's another branch, a magic they call the Enneagram, where you take and spell letters. And so they believe that there's the essence of all these different words in these Enneagrams. The Beatles were really into the Enneagram thing, and they had a lot of that in their music. The Beatles, especially John Lennon, was definitely involved with Satanism. I should maybe do a video on that sometime. When you listen to these backwards, they have a little message.
Ayulala.
Ayulala.
The Christmas tree is actually a pagan thing. It's not a Christian thing. Adopted into Christianity. There are some Christians that say you shouldn't celebrate Christmas because nobody knows when Christ was born. It was actually a pagan thing, is why they had it celebrated on December 25th. Also, the word Yule, if you don't know what that is, Yule it's an old pagan thing for that time of year around the winter solstice. Yule is similar to the word year, but it's also null. It's like zero. It's the end of the year. It's the beginning of the new year. So it's like the 0 point. It's where the year comes back. It's called Yule. And the pagans had many different celebrations, including rituals, including human sacrifice at Yule time. And the Christmas tree, they would have their sacred groves, or they would sacrifice victims, and they'd hang them from their trees and their sacred groves. There was this group in Twin Peaks. They're kind of like a secret society kind of. They were supposedly fighting evil. But anyway, this is their little calling card, their little symbol for their group. Just happens to be the Christmas tree. Nice, charming little bit of dialogue, wasn't it? Twice this thing mentions Benet. Okay, and the first thing that came to my mind was Jean Benet Ramsey. There's a lot of things I was looking through some of these videos. A lot of things that bring up the Jean Benet Ramsey thing. I believe a lot of this whole thing about Twin Peaks centered around the satanic murder of Jean Benet Ramsey. This actress here, she looks a lot like Jean Benet Ramsey. She's an adult woman, because people wouldn't go for the idea of murdering or persecuting a little girl on a TV show. There's some similarities in the murder too. If you listen to those things, those little backwards messages, we talk about Benet, and they're also apparently talking about in what really happened to Jean Benet Ramsey. She was raped, apparently tortured, and murdered. The back of her head was smashed in. The same thing, this character, the victims in Twin Peaks, there's like 3 or 4 women, or 2 or 3 different women. I'm not an expert on the show. I never really watched it. I just started studying it. But the back of their head was smashed in, and this kind of thing. Very similar. A lot of similarities. This could all be a coincidence, but it's hard to call it that. Now, there's an ancient cult that used to, part of their way of doing things was to smash in the back of the head of their victims. In fact, this cult, apparently some kind of like a satanic cult, still exists apparently in modern times. And I don't hear this happening too often anymore, but it has happened. There's this family headed by this lady named Ma Bender, back in, I think it was 1860s or 70s. She ran a little boarding house kind of out in the sticks, and she would offer people room and food, and then they had a drape across the room, and one of her sons would come up and sledgehammer 2x4 somebody in the back of the head, and then they'd rob them and kill them. Now, if they had children, the children would be tortured and raped, apparently for hours. A few people maybe wondered where they get the word Twin Peaks. Well, supposedly it's the name of the town, which, is from the mountains around. Well, yeah, but everything in the show obviously is symbolic. I believe it comes from this symbol right here, the heart. The heart is actually a ancient pagan sexual symbol. It doesn't stand for the heart in your chest. It can represent a woman's buttocks, breasts, or but more likely the woman's pubic area. There's symbols for male sexual symbols too. The obelisk, maypole, the sword, the magic wand. These are all represents of male sexuality, but the heart is a symbol of female sexuality. And you'll see here, this heart has been broken. This heart's been torn apart. This is a sacrificed vision. This whole show basically revolves around the idea of female sacrificing the female, which is also the case with Jean Benet Ramsey. Jean Benet Ramsey was born about the time, just before the show, about a year or so before the show aired. Now, she hadn't been murdered yet, so if this is referring to her, means that they had already pre-planned it. Now, that might sound really hard for many people to believe, but these people do stuff like this. Because they got a lot of people in high positions of power. They all are working together to create this, whatever their little game is, their disaster, their murder, their mass murder. And they plan it decades in advance. Make sure that all the key people are in the right places ahead of time, pull these things off. They pre-plan a lot of things years in advance. And they put little clues in the TV shows and the movies. I don't know why. Of course, in '92, when this series came out, you didn't have as much technology and the internet as you have now. So they probably figured nobody would be able to figure this thing out. And even today, most people wouldn't have figured this out. But I'm kind of a weirdo. I can figure out a lot of weird things. But I've noticed kind of a Jean Benet Ramsey type theme kind of pops up in certain things that were similar to her and her murder. It seems to pop up in this series. I'll give you some background on Jean Benet Ramsey if you're not familiar with the story. This was several years ago. She was on the face of every tabloid. And that itself tells you something. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of children that are murdered every year in this country, and there's several 100,000 children that disappear every year in this country. And this is forbidden information. Most of them are unwanted children, because unwanted children nobody makes a big deal of if they disappear, But there's a lot of murdered children. Why is this Jean Benet Ramsey getting so much media attention? I mean, her face was on tabloid covers more than Princess Diana at times. I mean, it was all over the place. A lot of people were upset by the fact that she's like a 6-year-old girl, and even before the age of 6, her mother is dressing her up like an adult woman in very sensuous ways and taking her to beauty contests for little girls. If you look at the amount of media publicity that this Jean Benet Ramsey murder got, especially in the National Enquirer, the National Enquirer, this is not a coincidence. There's thousands of children that die and are murdered, and none of them get anywhere near this much media attention, especially in a rag like the National Enquirer. Now, the National Enquirer was owned and operated by the CIA and is part of a mind control project. So the fact that this is in the forefront all the time, and every day you get a different theory about how she died. I mean, it's almost certain that this was pre-planned.
Excuse me, who are you?
I'm, Jeff Shapiro.
Are you a member of this church?
Not yet, but Father Haverstock and I are certainly talking about it.
Yeah, well, I don't believe you. Why are you really here?
Here for the same reason as you, ma'am. Find my faith and be able to keep it.
Raul, I think this man is fine.
Fine? On who? What is this about, Jeff?
There's some misunderstanding.
But that magazine is pure trash. All you do is make up lies about people.
The whole murder thing doesn't make any sense, the way the official version. I mean, the parents had to have been involved. There's virtually no way they couldn't have been. What happened, is their daughter was missing. They searched the house, they couldn't find her. Then they found a note on the stairs. And this doesn't make any sense either. Why would somebody put the note on the Ramsey note on the stairs? Saying they wanted $118,000 for the back. And so they called the police. Now, supposedly the Ramseys had already, and their friends had searched the house, and the police came and they searched the house, didn't know anything. Then later on, the father went down the basement and found his daughter down the basement, her body. How nobody noticed that, I don't know. The cops checked the area, no sign of forced entry. There was fresh snow, no tracks leading up to the house. There was one window, I believe, in the basement that had been broken, and somebody could have possibly gotten into there, and that had been broken for a while. The autopsy report showed that she had been molested numerous times. Okay, so this isn't a one-time thing. According to Kathy O'Brien, she mentioned that they found the book, Create a Sex Slave with a Stun Gun, in that house when the police were investigating. The police completely botched this investigation, probably deliberately. After looking at all the evidence, I would say this case was deliberately botched. Okay, the police were giving out false information to the press, not once, not twice, over and over again. Police lied about several things, okay? The press continued to put out false information about this case from day one. Even after it was proven to be false information, they continued to do so. There was no forensic expert. They didn't preserve any of the evidence. I would be willing to bet very good money that the police chief in this town and probably several of the higher-ups in this town are Satanists, which is why they chose to have this done here, which is probably one of the reasons John Ramsey moved to this area. I was in Boulder before, and there's a lot of weird stuff. It's a beautiful town in a lot of ways, but there's some weird occult stuff there.
Expert to help them collect evidence at the scene, the Boulder police contaminated or missed what that intruder left.
Were you called to the Ramsey house?
No, we were not called to the Ramsey house in the initial stages, no.
For the first time, Ron Walker explains what happened.
I offered at that point any and all FBI resources that were available to assist the Boulder police in their investigation. And that offer was declined.
Fatal mistakes are made during those first crucial 24 hours. Neighbors aren't questioned, searches aren't done, and the key witnesses aren't interviewed.
We've been told that what should have happened that morning is instead of being told just to leave the
accident, and you were dealing with that grief.
Yes, yeah, that was tough. It was, that really was a changing point in my life when Beth died.
I knew that name Ramsey meant something. I remember, it's a pharaoh of Egypt, Ramsey II, supposedly the one that screwed with Moses, which isn't really even true. But is this a coincidence? Probably not. 3 neighbors said they heard a blood-curdling scream that night. But the psychopathic Ramseys claim they didn't hear a thing. Oh, here's some more stuff about Ramsey. He was dating Beth Holloway, the mother of Natalie Holloway. Remember the Alabama student who disappeared during a trip to Aruba? The plot thickens. He was a military officer. You'll find a lot of these people were in the military. Also, his oldest daughter from his first marriage died in a car accident. Ordinarily, I would say that was probably just an accident, but knowing this guy, I don't know. And of course now, Patsy is now dead. Did she just die of ovarian cancer, like they said, or did they kill her? Who knows? One thing that's clear, there's more than enough evidence to have arrested, especially Patsy. There's so much evidence and witnesses that said there were things found, like the boy's pocket knife that the housekeeper took away and hid in a drawer, and Patsy would have found it when she was looking for sheets. The blanket that was in the dryer, and only Patsy would have known about that. There's no question. Anyone else, they would have been arrested. And yet, 4 months after this, they still hadn't been arrested. Several experts agree that Patsy Ramsey is the one who wrote this ransom note. The housekeeper said that Patsy became really moody just before Christmas. It's like I said before, she was part of it, but she didn't do it all by herself. No, there is clearly, there's evidence that there was some other, there's DNA, pubic hairs found apparently from another male that's never been identified. Probably never will be because they don't want them to be identified.
If I were a resident of Boulder, I would tell my friends to keep your baby close to you.
That is an interesting name, Patsy. Is that another coincidence with this case? No, I don't believe this woman did it, but she knows who did it. She was involved with it. She's involved in the cover-up. She knows her husband is involved with it. But she wouldn't have had the stomach to do something like this. She was it's clear from several things I've seen her, she was upset about her daughter being killed. Not as upset as she should have been. Like she was upset. Some of her antics appear to be acting. She's been caught in multiple lies about this. But, I don't think she did it, though. But she went along with it. She didn't want to, but she felt like she had to. The Boulder police has claimed that, she did this because her daughter was bedwetting is absolutely ludicrous. And that's another thing. I mean, the daughter is 6 years old and she's still wetting the bed, which there are some kids that have problems with that, but that's often an indication of sexual or physical, mental, emotional abuse. But the most bizarre things is still having to have people wipe her when she goes to the bathroom. She's 6 years old and she's not fully potty trained? Now that is really strange. Something funny going on there. Anyway, this Patsy is basically that. She's a scapegoat. And it really bothers me that the Boulder police would try to make such ridiculously stupid claims that she just got mad and hit her daughter in the back of the head because she was bedwetting. I mean, the child's head was not hit with a flashlight. It was probably hit with something like a 2x4 or a baseball bat. It was crushed in. This child was savagely raped and tortured. That is a fact. I'll show you autopsy photos and documents in a minute. So this is absolute proof that the Boulder police are lying and covering up. Instead of investigating this, they're covering up.
There are at least 2 people on the face of this earth that know.